The deputy thought he had arrested the most dangerous man in the diner. He had no idea the only thing standing between that little town and disaster was the man wearing handcuffs. Snow pushed hard against the diner windows like winter had grown impatient, rattling the old glass every few minutes beneath a neon sign that flickered half awake above the parking lot. The place was called Rosie's Diner, though most people in the tiny Montana town simply called it Rosie's because nothing else stayed open after 8 during snow season. Inside, warmth carried the smell of bacon grease, burnt coffee, and old stories. Truckers sat quietly near the counter warming frozen hands around mugs. A teenage waitress wiped tables near the jukebox while an older woman with silver hair worked the register like she had owned the building since before half the town existed. Near the back window, where snow drifted against the glass, sat Mason Reed. Quiet. Still. The kind of stillness people noticed even when they pretended not to. 48 years old with a weathered face, shaped by cold mornings and harder years, Mason sat alone in a faded military jacket worn smooth at the sleeves. A black coffee cooled slowly near his hands while exhaustion rested quietly in his eyes. Beside him lay Titan, a large black and tan German shepherd stretched calmly beneath the booth, ears alert despite his relaxed posture. Every few moments Titan lifted his head slightly, scanning the room before settling again. Loyal. Focused. Watching things people missed. Mason had been driving since sunrise. 3 states behind him. No destination that mattered much ahead. Temporary jobs had a way of running out around the same time Hope did. A ranch outside Idaho. Fence repairs in Wyoming. Odd work near Helena. Enough to keep moving. Not enough to call living. He took another slow sip of coffee while snow thickened outside. Quiet suited him. Quiet usually kept trouble away. But small towns had a way of distrusting silence. Especially from strangers. Across the diner, 2 locals sat whispering over pie they barely touched. One glanced toward Mason for the 3rd time. Then toward Titan. Then back again. Military dog, one muttered softly. You see that? The other nodded slowly. Guy has not said 10 words since he walked in. Suspicion traveled fast where boredom lived longer than excitement. 10 minutes later, the front bell above the diner door jingled softly. Cold air rushed inside along with a man in a sheriff's jacket dusted with snow. Deputy Ryan Cooper stepped through the entrance carrying winter on his shoulders and caution in his eyes. Late 30s. Clean cut. Local. The kind of deputy who knew every truck in town and noticed the ones he did not recognize. He nodded politely at familiar faces before the older waitress motioned him over. Evelyn Brooks leaned close enough to whisper. Ryan listened quietly while glancing toward Mason's booth. His expression changed slightly. Concern first, then caution, finally suspicion. You sure? He asked softly. Evelyn shrugged. Just feels strange. Big military dog. Quiet guy. Somebody called dispatch from the gas station, said he has been parked around town most of the afternoon. Ryan glanced again toward Mason. Mason noticed immediately, but said nothing. People looked all the time, especially at Titan. Big dogs made nervous people imagine danger where none existed. Titan lifted his head now, watching Ryan carefully. Not aggressive, just aware. Ryan approached slowly, stopping near the booth. Evening, he said casually. Mason looked up once. Calm. Tired. Evening. Ryan motioned lightly toward the coffee. Passing through, Mason nodded once. Something like that. Short answers. Too short. Ryan shifted slightly. Mind showing some identification? Mason hesitated briefly before reaching slowly toward his jacket pocket. Titan stood immediately beneath the table. Not threatening. Alert. Ryan noticed. One hand drifted instinctively closer to his belt. Easy, Ryan said quietly. Mason stopped moving and looked toward Titan. Down. Instantly, the German shepherd obeyed, though he stayed standing now, eyes moving somewhere beyond Ryan. Focused. Strange. Mason handed over his license. Ryan studied it carefully. Out-of-state plates. No permanent address. Retired military listed on veteran identification. Navy. Ryan looked back toward Mason. You staying somewhere local? Mason shook his head once. Truck. That answer landed badly. Another local nearby stood slowly and quietly moved his family farther down the counter. Ryan noticed that too. Sir, Ryan said carefully, lowering his voice. We got a few calls. Folks are nervous. Mason looked out the snowy window for a second. About what? Ryan glanced toward Titan. Military dog. Stranger sitting around town. You keeping to yourself does not exactly help. Mason almost smiled at that, though sadness reached him first. Funny thing about loneliness. After a while, silence started looking suspicious to people. Titan suddenly stood taller. Ears forward now. Not toward Ryan. Toward the kitchen hallway. Low rumble in his chest. Almost too quiet to hear. Mason noticed instantly. His expression shifted slightly. Focused now. Ryan noticed that too and misunderstood it immediately. Sir, he said firmer this time. I need you to stand up. Mason stayed calm. Something wrong. Just precaution. Ryan hesitated before adding. Turn around for me. A hush settled quietly across the diner. Snow pressed harder against the windows. Coffee steam drifted forgotten into cold air near the booth. Mason exhaled slowly and stood without resistance. Titan stepped closer immediately, but did not bark. Did not lunge. He kept staring toward the kitchen instead, muscles tense now beneath thick fur. Ryan carefully placed handcuffs around Mason's wrists while nervous whispers spread quietly across the diner. Mason never argued, never raised his voice, just looked once toward Titan. Stay. Titan obeyed. Barely. But something in the dog had changed now. Stillness replaced by tension. His nose lifted slightly into the air. Then suddenly, the German shepherd let out a low warning growl. Not at the deputy. Not at Mason. Titan stood frozen, staring hard toward the swinging kitchen doors like something dangerous had already walked inside. Titan did not bark again right away. Somehow that unsettled Mason more than barking would have. The German shepherd stood perfectly still near the booth, ears locked forward, nose slightly lifted into the air, as if reading something invisible no one else had noticed yet. Around them, nervous whispers moved quietly through the diner like steam rising from forgotten coffee cups. A truck driver near the counter muttered something about military dogs making him uneasy. A teenage waitress suddenly stopped wiping tables altogether. Even the old jukebox in the corner had gone strangely silent. Deputy Ryan kept one hand near Mason's arm while trying to look more confident than he felt. Your dog always act like this? He asked carefully. Mason did not look at him right away. His eyes stayed on Titan. Calm. Measuring. Listening. No. Mason answered quietly. Only when something feels wrong. Ryan frowned slightly. Wrong how? Mason exhaled slowly, cold metal cuffs resting against his wrists. Titan was military trained. Ryan's expression tightened. Military trained for what? Mason finally turned toward him. Danger detection. That answer landed badly. The deputy looked toward Titan again, then back at Mason. Around them, people shifted nervously in booths. Somebody near the front quietly asked for the check. Small-town fear had a way of spreading faster than facts. Ryan lowered his voice. You are saying your dog thinks something dangerous is here? Mason nodded once. If he smells something, somebody is already in trouble. Across the diner, Evelyn Brooks stood near the register pretending to organize receipts while quietly watching Titan. She had worked Rosie's diner for nearly 30 years and trusted instincts more than most people trusted news. Dogs usually barked at strangers. Delivery men. Loud teenagers. This dog had barely acknowledged anyone all evening. Until now. Titan suddenly took one slow step toward the swinging kitchen doors. Then another. Muscles tight beneath thick fur. Nose working carefully. Focused. Intentional. Like he had already made up his mind. Titan, Mason said softly. The dog stopped immediately, but did not look away from the kitchen. Ryan crossed his arms slightly. Convenient timing, he muttered. Mason almost smiled, though tiredness reached him first. You think I plan getting handcuffed? Ryan said nothing. Fair point. But suspicion still sat heavy inside him. Quiet strangers in small towns usually meant trouble. And quiet military men with military dogs meant even more paperwork. Near the kitchen entrance, one of the cooks suddenly appeared carrying a tray of burgers. Mid-40s. Nervous eyes. Slight sweat along his forehead, even though winter pressed hard against the windows outside. Titan watched him carefully now. Too carefully. The cook froze briefly, seeing the dog staring. What is wrong with him? He asked. Nobody answered immediately. Mason looked toward the man for a few quiet seconds. Something felt off. Hard to explain. Navy training taught you to notice little things. Nervous hands. Uneven breathing. Small details people forgot they showed. The cook disappeared back through the swinging doors quickly. Too quickly. Titan let out another low rumble. This time deeper. more urgent. Ryan noticed it immediately. Sir, he said firmer now, you need to control your dog. Mason stayed calm. He is under control. Ryan frowned. Looks tense to me. Mason looked toward Titan again. Titan is never tense without reason. For a second, nobody spoke. Snow hit the windows harder now, white wind swallowing most of the parking lot outside. A pickup truck struggled past on the highway, headlights barely visible through thick weather. Inside, warmth should have felt comforting. Instead, something felt strangely tight, like the room itself had started holding its breath. Then Titan moved again. Fast this time. Not aggressive. Purposeful. He walked straight toward the hallway leading behind the kitchen and stopped suddenly. Nose high now. Breathing sharper. One bark. Loud. Sharp enough to make half the diner jump. Ryan stepped instinctively forward. Hey. Titan barked again. Toward the hallway. Not people. Not Ryan. The hallway. Mason's expression changed slightly. Focused now. Serious. Deputy, he said quietly. Listen to me. Ryan hesitated. If Titan is acting like this, there is a reason. Or maybe he is reacting to stress, Ryan replied. Mason shook his head once. No, calm certainty lived inside that answer. He smells something. The teenage waitress near the counter suddenly looked up. Actually, she said hesitantly. Everyone turned. I thought I smelled something weird earlier. Ryan frowned. What kind of weird? She shrugged nervously. Like, burnt metal maybe? Evelyn paused behind the register, face tightening slightly now. Then quietly, almost to herself, she whispered, I thought the heater smelled funny too. Mason looked toward the kitchen again. Then the hallway. Titan still stood frozen there like a guard nobody assigned. Ryan shifted uneasily. Maybe coincidence. Maybe nerves. But something about the dog no longer felt random. Mason lowered his voice slightly. Deputy. Ryan looked over. If you enjoy stories where quiet heroes and loyal dogs uncover danger before anyone else sees it, make sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next incredible story. Ryan blinked awkwardly as Mason continued calmly. Now maybe you should ask yourself why my dog is still staring at that hallway. Right then, Titan suddenly barked again. Harder this time. Then lowered his body slightly, eyes fixed ahead. Somewhere beyond the kitchen, something metal popped softly in the distance. And for the first time all night, Evelyn quietly whispered the words nobody wanted to hear. Do you smell gas? The diner suddenly felt smaller after Evelyn said the words nobody wanted to hear. Gas. Strange how fear moved through a room before proof ever arrived. 1 second people sat quietly around half-finished meals. The next, every sound seemed louder. Coffee spoons tapping ceramic. Wind scratching the windows. Somebody nervously clearing a throat near the counter. Deputy Ryan Cooper stood still for a moment, caught between instinct and uncertainty. His eyes shifted toward the kitchen hallway where Titan remained frozen like a statue carved from muscle and purpose. The German shepherd had not moved an inch. Ears forward, breathing steady, waiting, watching. Mason Reed noticed the look on Ryan's face and recognized it immediately. Doubt. The kind men carried right before they realized something had gone wrong. Deputy, Mason said quietly, keeping his voice level despite the cold cuffs around his wrists. You should take it seriously. Ryan hesitated. Could just be a bad heater. Mason nodded once. Could be. Then after a second, Titan does not react like this for nothing. Near the counter, Evelyn slowly stepped closer, wiping nervous hands against her apron. We had someone fix the kitchen line last week, she said quietly. Something about pressure valves. One of the cooks poked his head through the kitchen doors again. Same nervous look. Same rushed breathing. Everything is fine back there, he said quickly. Too quickly. Titan let out another low rumble. The cook froze. For half a second, something strange passed over his face. Nervousness. Fear maybe. Then he disappeared again without another word. Mason watched carefully. Navy training had taught him to notice small things people missed. The way a person avoided eye contact. The way hands shook without cold weather to blame. Small details often spoke louder than words. Ryan noticed it too now. You know him? Mason asked quietly. Evelyn shook her head. Temporary guy? Started 2 weeks ago. Snow slammed harder against the diner windows. Somewhere outside, the wind groaned across empty roads, disappearing into white darkness. Rosie's diner sat far enough from town that emergency response during storms took time. Too much time if something serious happened. Titan suddenly pulled forward harder now, nose high again. He barked once. Sharp. Urgent. Then started toward the hallway leading behind the kitchen. Mason's expression shifted immediately. Calm, but focused. Something changed, he said quietly. Ryan frowned. How would you know? Mason looked toward Titan. Because he just stopped warning us. Ryan blinked. What? Mason lowered his voice. Now he is trying to find it. For a second nobody spoke. Even the truckers near the counter had gone quiet now. One stood halfway from his stool. Another quietly pulled his wallet out, suddenly eager to leave. But the storm outside had turned ugly. Thick snow swallowed visibility. Nobody wanted to drive unless they had no choice. Ryan stepped closer to Mason. Tell me exactly what this dog was trained for. Mason shifted slightly against the cuffs. Detection work overseas. Drugs. Mason shook his head once. Hazards. Chemical smells. Explosives. Gas leaks sometimes. Ryan looked toward Titan again. The dog stood near the hallway now, staring at a narrow storage corridor beyond the kitchen doors. Focused like he had already solved something humans had not caught up to yet. A teenager sitting near the front suddenly wrinkled his nose. I smell it too, he said quietly. Something weird. Evelyn inhaled carefully. Her face tightened. Dear Lord, she whispered. That does smell like gas. The realization moved quickly now. Nervous glances. Chairs scraping softly. A mother near the corner booth pulled her young son closer. Ryan's confidence cracked slightly beneath responsibility. Small-town deputies handled speeding tickets. Lost dogs. Weather accidents. Not situations where something invisible could hurt an entire room. Mason noticed it immediately. Funny thing about pressure. It showed who people really were. Some froze. Some ran. Others got quiet. Mason had learned long ago that panic solved nothing. Deputy, he said calmly. Listen carefully. Ryan looked over. I need 60 seconds. For what? Take the cuffs off. Ryan stared at him like he had asked for a loaded weapon. That is not happening. Mason stayed calm. Then people here might stay in danger. Titan barked again, harder this time, then suddenly pulled toward the back hallway with enough force to make silverware rattle slightly on nearby tables. Somewhere beyond the kitchen, something metallic clicked, then popped softly. Small sound. Wrong sound. The cook from earlier rushed briefly through the kitchen doors carrying a towel, moving faster than before. Sweat lined his forehead despite the cold weather outside. He avoided eye contact completely this time. Mason watched him disappear again. Something is not right back there, he said quietly. Ryan hesitated again. Duty fought uncertainty behind tired eyes. Then Evelyn stepped closer, voice softer than before. Deputy, she said carefully. Maybe we should at least check. Ryan looked toward the hallway. Toward Titan. Toward Mason standing there handcuffed without anger. No panic. No resistance. Just certainty. Outside, winter kept roaring against the windows. Inside, fear had started growing teeth. Titan suddenly stiffened completely. Nose lifted higher now. Then came one deep bark that echoed through the diner hard enough to silence every voice in the room. Mason looked straight at Ryan. Calm. Certain. Serious. Deputy, he said quietly. Whatever he smells, he paused briefly. It just got worse. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound inside Rosie's diner came from wind pushing hard against the windows and the quiet hum of an old refrigerator somewhere behind the kitchen wall. Titan stood frozen near the hallway, muscles tight beneath thick fur, nose lifted slightly higher now, like invisible warning signs had grown louder. Deputy Ryan Cooper looked from the dog to Mason Reed and back again, uncertainty settling heavily across his face. Small towns taught people caution, but moments like this taught something harder. Sometimes caution arrived too late. Everybody stay calm, Ryan finally said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Nervous eyes moved around the room. A truck driver stood halfway from his stool, wallet still in hand. The young mother near the corner booth quietly pulled her son closer. Coffee sat forgotten on tables, steam fading into uneasy silence. Mason shifted slightly against the handcuffs and looked directly at Ryan. Deputy, he said calmly. You are running out of time. Ryan frowned. You keep saying that. Mason nodded once toward Titan. Because he keeps saying it. Titan suddenly barked again, loud enough now that silverware trembled slightly against plates. Then he moved farther down the hallway leading behind the kitchen and stopped again near a narrow service door. His breathing sharpened. Focused. Intentional. No confusion. No fear. Just certainty. Mason watched carefully. Then his expression changed. Something quiet but immediate passed through him. Recognition. He found it. Mason said softly. Ryan turned sharply. Found what? Mason answered without hesitation. The source. Ryan hesitated again, looking toward the kitchen doors where warm light spilled softly across worn tile floors. Somewhere back there, somebody dropped a pan with a loud metal clang. Too loud. Too sudden. Then came another strange sound. A soft clicking noise. Rhythmic. Wrong. Mason had heard sounds like that before. Overseas. Near damaged fuel systems. Near pressure failures. Small noises that mattered more than people realized. Evelyn stepped closer, nervous hands clasped together. Deputy, she said quietly. Maybe we should call the gas company. Ryan pulled out his radio halfway, then paused. Snowstorms slowed everything. Utility crews. Emergency services. Travel itself. Mason knew that look immediately. Ryan was calculating time. The kind of math people did when they hoped a problem would stay small long enough to solve itself. Mason lowered his voice. You need to get people out. Ryan glanced sharply at him. And you somehow know that. Mason stayed calm. No, then after a beat. But Titan does. Ryan looked toward the German Shepherd again. Titan had lowered himself slightly now, staring at the service door like he expected something behind it to move. Another soft metallic pop echoed faintly through the wall. Small, but enough. Enough for instinct to finally outrun doubt. Ryan exhaled hard. Decision settled across his face. Everybody, he called louder now. I need you to head outside for a few minutes. Immediate resistance followed. Outside, somebody muttered. In this weather? Another man shook his head. For what? Nobody liked uncertainty, especially not during winter storms. Ryan stood straighter. Just precaution. Mason looked around the room once. Fear worked strangely. People moved faster when somebody calm gave them permission to stop pretending everything was normal. Listen to him, Mason said quietly. Something about his voice changed the room. Calm carried weight when it came from people who had survived harder things. Chairs finally scraped against floors. Jackets pulled on. Nervous movement replaced hesitation. Evelyn began guiding customers toward the entrance. The young waitress grabbed coats from empty booths. Outside, snow still fell thick and heavy beneath parking lot lights. Titan barked once more. Hard. Urgent now. Then turned back toward Mason immediately. Waiting. Ryan noticed. What? He asked. Mason looked down at the cuffs around his wrists. You want everyone out safely? Ryan hesitated. Long enough to show the fight still happening inside him. Trust was hard when pride got involved, especially after publicly handcuffing somebody in front of half the diner. Deputy, Mason said quietly, never raising his voice. I am not asking for freedom. I am asking for 60 seconds. Another metallic sound echoed from somewhere behind the kitchen. Then suddenly the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Just enough to silence every remaining conversation inside the diner. Evelyn stopped walking. Oh Lord, she whispered softly. Ryan looked toward the kitchen again. Then back at Mason. Then at Titan standing perfectly still, eyes fixed forward like he had been waiting for humans to finally catch up. Slowly, reluctantly, Ryan reached for the handcuffs. The clicks sounded strangely loud in the room. Mason rolled his wrists once after the cuffs came free, but wasted no time. No anger. No speech. No pride. Just purpose. He crouched briefly beside Titan, one hand resting lightly against thick fur. Show me, he said softly. Titan moved instantly, straight toward the hallway. Focused. Fast. Mason followed without hesitation. Ryan took one quick breath and stepped after them. Behind the kitchen doors, somewhere deeper inside the diner, another sound echoed quietly through the walls. Then Mason suddenly stopped mid-step, face tightening for the first time all night. His eyes shifted toward the back hallway. Wait, he said sharply, calm disappearing into urgency. Somebody is still back there. Mason Reed stopped, so suddenly Ryan nearly walked into him. Titan stood frozen near the narrow hallway beyond the kitchen, body stiff as stone, ears locked forward toward the back corner of the diner. Somewhere behind an old supply shelf, hidden beyond the kitchen storage area, came a sound so small most people would have missed it entirely. Crying. Faint. Frightened. Child crying. Mason looked toward Ryan once. Calm still lived on his face, But urgency had replaced patience. "There is a kid back there," he said quietly. Ryan frowned immediately. "What?" Another soft sound drifted through the hallway, this time louder. A scared voice. Young, crying hard enough now to tremble through the walls. Ryan turned pale. "Everybody already left," he muttered, almost to himself. Mason shook his head once. "No." Titan moved before another word could be spoken, trotting quickly through the narrow hallway between stacked supplies and old cleaning buckets. Mason followed without hesitation. Ryan moved right behind them. The farther they walked, the stronger the strange smell became now. Sharp. Wrong. Not overwhelming yet, but enough. Enough to explain Titan's behavior. Somewhere nearby, old metal pipes clicked softly behind the walls. A heater hummed unevenly. Mason had learned long ago to trust the things people ignored. Smells. Sounds. Patterns that suddenly changed. Overseas, details kept people alive. Here, details suddenly mattered again. Titan stopped near a restroom door at the far end of the hallway. Closed. The dog lowered himself slightly, whining once beneath his breath. Not fear. Concern. Mason crouched briefly beside him. "Good boy," he said softly, then looked toward Ryan. "Whoever is in there is scared." Ryan knocked quickly. "Hello." No answer. Just crying. "Quieter now." "Sheriff's office," Ryan called carefully. "You okay in there?" Silence for 2 long seconds. Then finally a tiny voice cracked through the door. "Mom said not to open it." Mason glanced toward Ryan. Fear made kids hold on to instructions harder than adults realized. Another soft metallic pop echoed through the ceiling somewhere nearby. Titan's ears twitched instantly. Mason looked toward the pipes above them. Time mattered now. Ryan tried again. "Buddy, everybody already left the diner. We just want to help." Small silence again. Then, "I got scared." Mason stepped closer, voice calmer than before. Different now. Softer. The kind of voice people used when they understood fear. "Hey," he said gently. "My name is Mason." More silence. "You like dogs?" A tiny sniffle from inside. "Maybe." Titan quietly sat beside the door like he somehow understood the assignment. Calm. Patient. Mason smiled faintly. "I got a dog out here. Biggest softie in Montana." Ryan almost laughed despite himself. Titan looked briefly offended by the description. "His name is Titan," Mason continued. "He found you." Quiet again. Then finally the child whispered. "Really?" "Really," Mason answered. "He is kind of a hero tonight." The lock clicked softly. Slow. Careful. The restroom door opened just enough for a frightened little boy around 7 years old to peek through, cheeks red from crying. Mason immediately crouched lower to avoid towering over him. "Hey there," Mason said gently. Titan slowly lowered his head and stepped forward just enough to sniff the air near the boy, tail barely wagging. Controlled. Safe. The boy hesitated, then reached carefully toward Titan's fur. "He is warm," he whispered. Mason nodded. "Yeah, he has got a good heart." Ryan exhaled quietly beside them, relief arriving too late to feel comfortable. Somewhere deeper inside the walls, another strange clicking sound echoed again. Louder this time. Mason stood immediately. Calm disappeared into focus. "We need to go now." Ryan nodded quickly. "Come on, buddy." The little boy froze. "My mom." "Outside waiting," Ryan assured him. Mason gently removed his military jacket and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. "Just for a minute," he said quietly. "You hold on to that." The boy nodded. Titan moved first again, walking calmly beside the child like an escort who took his job seriously. They moved quickly back through the hallway toward the diner entrance. Empty booths now sat abandoned beneath dim lights. Half-finished coffee cooled beside untouched meals. Wind shook the windows harder than before. Outside, snow covered the parking lot in thick white layers while nervous customers stood huddled near vehicles watching the diner anxiously. The moment the little boy stepped outside, a woman near the front screamed softly and ran toward him. Tears instantly replaced panic as she wrapped him tightly into her arms. "I thought you left with your uncle," she whispered shakily. Ryan stepped back quietly, guilt settling heavier now. Mason barely reacted. He simply glanced once toward the diner building. Toward Titan. The German Shepherd had stopped again near the entrance, staring hard back toward the kitchen. Nose high. Still focused. Still warning. Mason looked at Ryan carefully. Calm voice again. "Serious now." "Deputy," he said quietly. "Whatever is happening inside," he paused. "We are not done yet." Snow continued falling hard outside Rosie's diner, thick flakes swallowing headlights and quieting the entire parking lot beneath a blanket of white. Customers stood near their vehicles wrapped in coats, breath rising into cold air as nervous conversations drifted between them. Nobody seemed eager to leave. Not because of the storm anymore, because something inside the diner still felt unfinished. Mason Reed stood near the entrance, shoulders dusted lightly with snow after carrying the frightened little boy outside. Titan remained beside him, body still alert, nose lifted toward the building like the danger had not passed yet. Deputy Ryan Cooper stepped beside Mason, rubbing cold hands together without realizing it. Guilt had started settling somewhere uncomfortable inside him now. Hard to ignore after watching the same man he had handcuffed calmly rescue a terrified child without hesitation. Ryan glanced toward Mason quietly. "You could have left," he said after a moment. Mason looked toward the diner windows where warm yellow light flickered faintly against the storm. "Still people connected to that building," he answered simply. "Funny thing about decent people, they rarely announce themselves. They just stayed longer than comfort asked them to." Across the parking lot, the little boy sat inside his mother's truck wrapped in Mason's old military jacket. Small hands gripping the sleeves tightly like safety had a shape now. Titan suddenly shifted. Immediate. Focused. The German shepherd turned sharply back toward the diner entrance and gave one low sound deep in his chest. Not fear. Not warning anymore. Something else. Urgency. Mason noticed instantly. "He still smells it," he said quietly. Ryan looked uneasy now. "Gas." Mason nodded once. "Or something close enough to matter." The diner lights flickered again behind the windows. Once. Then twice. Evelyn stood near the front entrance helping calm frightened customers while the teenage waitress tried passing out coffee in paper cups from an emergency thermos someone found in the kitchen. Even from outside, people could see tension sitting across Evelyn's face now. She had worked Rosie's diner nearly half her life. Buildings felt personal after enough years. Ryan finally reached for his radio. "Dispatch," he said, voice steadier now. "I need emergency utility response at Rosie's diner. Possible gas issue." Static answered first. Then the familiar tired dispatcher voice crackled through storm interference. "Weather delay likely. Closest unit maybe 45 minutes. Ryan looked toward Mason immediately. 45 minutes sounded much longer in weather like this. Mason stayed calm. "Too long," he said quietly. Ryan frowned. "So what are you suggesting?" Mason glanced toward Titan again. "We shut off whatever is feeding the problem." Ryan hesitated. "And how exactly are we supposed to know where?" Mason almost smiled faintly, then looked down toward Titan. "He already knows." Titan had moved closer to the diner entrance again now, waiting patiently like he expected humans to catch up one more time. The German shepherd stared toward the side utility area near the rear kitchen wall. Focused. Intentional. Mason noticed immediately. "There," he said softly. Ryan followed his gaze. "You seriously trust the dog that much?" Mason's expression softened slightly. Tired eyes. Quiet certainty. Titan saved men overseas before they even knew danger existed. He paused briefly. "I stopped doubting him years ago." Something about the way he said it landed differently this time. No ego. No exaggeration. Just truth spoken quietly. Ryan looked down for a second, embarrassment finally catching up to him. Strange how fast opinions changed once people stopped being strangers. "About earlier," Ryan started awkwardly. "The handcuffs." Mason shook his head once before he could finish. "You were doing your job." Ryan looked surprised. "Still." Mason shrugged lightly. "Small town. Storm night. Strange truck. Big dog." A faint tired smile crossed his face. "I probably would have looked suspicious too." Ryan let out a breath that almost sounded like relief. Funny thing about grace. Sometimes people offered it before apologies even found the right words. Titan suddenly stood taller again. One sharp bark. Then he moved around the side of the building without waiting. Mason followed immediately. Ryan cursed softly beneath his breath and hurried after them through thick snow. Near the rear kitchen wall sat a rusted maintenance area, half buried in drifted snow. Pipes. Utility boxes. Old heater vents coated with ice. Titan stopped beside a narrow metal access panel and sniffed hard near the base. Then stepped back immediately. Mason crouched beside it. His expression shifted serious fast. Even through freezing wind, the smell lingered faintly now. Gas. Ryan crouched nearby. Can you shut it off? Mason examined the panel carefully. Maybe. He brushed snow away with gloved hands until an old valve came into view. Rusted. Stiff. Forgotten too long. Somewhere inside the diner, lights flickered again, then dimmed. Titan stepped closer to Mason, watching every movement. Quiet. Loyal. Waiting. Mason reached carefully for the frozen valve and exhaled slowly into cold air. Deputy, he said calmly, eyes still on the pipe. I need you to tell me something before I turn this. Ryan frowned. What? Mason looked toward the diner once, then back at the frozen valve. Are you absolutely sure everybody made it outside? Mason Reed kept one gloved hand resting on the frozen valve while snow drifted sideways through the narrow alley behind Rosie's diner. The storm had grown heavier now, wind moving through utility pipes with a hollow sound that somehow made the entire night feel lonelier. Titan stood close beside him, alert eyes fixed not on the valve anymore, but toward the diner building itself. Waiting. Listening. Deputy Ryan Cooper hesitated before answering the question. I think so, he said finally. Mason looked up immediately. You think? Ryan rubbed one hand across his face, frustration catching up to exhaustion. Everybody moved fast. It was snowing hard. Parents grabbing kids. People yelling. He paused. I counted, but Mason finished the sentence quietly. You are not sure. Ryan hated that he was right. Somewhere inside the diner, lights flickered again, then dimmed longer this time before returning weakly. The old building suddenly looked fragile against the storm, like winter itself had started leaning too hard against it. Titan shifted instantly. One step toward the back entrance. Nose lifted again. Focused. Then came a low sound deep in his chest. Different this time. More urgent. Mason followed the dog's stare toward the diner windows. Something moved briefly inside near the kitchen. Fast. Human. Ryan noticed it too. Wait, he muttered. Somebody is still in there. Before either man could speak again, the back kitchen door cracked open suddenly. The nervous cook from earlier stepped halfway outside, carrying a small duffel bag beneath one arm. He stopped cold seeing them standing there. Snow landed across his jacket while nervous eyes darted too quickly between Mason, Ryan, and Titan. Titan immediately stiffened. Low growl now. Protective. Suspicious. Mason stood slowly. Calm. Watching. The cook forced a weak smile. Everything okay out here? Nobody answered right away. Funny thing about guilt. It arrived before words ever did. Ryan frowned immediately. Why are you still inside? The man hesitated. Too long. Just grabbing my stuff. Mason watched carefully. Same nervous breathing. Same shaky hands. Same refusal to make eye contact. Details mattered. Always had. Kitchen empty? Mason asked quietly. Yeah. The cook answered quickly. Too quickly. Titan growled deeper now. Ryan crossed his arms slightly. Then why is my dog acting like he does not believe you? The cook blinked. Your dog. Ryan glanced awkwardly toward Mason. Long night, he muttered under his breath. Mason crouched slightly beside Titan, one hand against thick fur. Easy. Titan obeyed instantly, but never stopped staring at the man. Something about him bothered the dog in ways instinct understood before logic ever caught up. Wind howled hard between the buildings. Somewhere inside the diner, another metallic click echoed faintly. The cook shifted nervously toward the parking lot. Look, I should probably get home. Mason spoke quietly. What happened in the kitchen? The man froze. Barely noticeable. But enough. Nothing happened. You sure? Mason asked. No accusation in his voice. Just calm. The kind of calm that somehow felt harder to lie around. Ryan stepped forward now. Sir, I need honest answers. The cook swallowed hard. Peter was acting weird earlier. Earlier, Ryan repeated. You did not mention that. I figured maintenance would handle it tomorrow. Titan suddenly barked once, sharp enough to cut through wind and excuses, then pulled hard toward the back door. Mason's expression changed immediately. There, he said quietly. He found something. Ryan looked toward the cook. Anybody else inside? No. The man answered fast. Too fast again. Mason stood still for a second, listening. Then came the faintest sound drifting through the storm. Almost impossible to hear. Music. Soft music. Faint. Somewhere inside the diner. Ryan frowned. What is that? Mason looked toward the building. Jukebox. Ryan blinked. So. Mason's face tightened slightly. Thought power was unstable. Then, quietly, somebody turned it on. The cook suddenly looked pale. Really pale now. Ryan noticed instantly. Who was still in there? Silence. Wind. Snow. Titan pulled harder now, barking sharply toward the kitchen entrance. Mason turned toward Ryan. Calm but serious. Deputy. Ryan already knew. No hesitation left now. Go, he said quickly. Mason moved immediately. Titan beside him like shadow, an instinct wrapped into fur. Ryan followed close behind through the back entrance. Warm, stale air hit them instantly. The kitchen looked abandoned. Half-clean dishes. Towels hanging crooked. Coffee still steaming forgotten near the sink. Somewhere deeper inside the diner, faint music drifted softly through old speakers. Titan moved first again. Fast but controlled. Straight toward the storage hallway. Then stopped suddenly near a locked supply closet beside the utility room. Growling now. Focused completely. Mason crouched slightly. Listened. And there it was again. Tiny sound. Barely louder than breathing. Crying. Another child. Ryan's face drained immediately. No, he whispered softly. Mason looked at him once. Calm. Steady. Deputy, he said quietly, and already reaching toward the locked door handle. I think somebody forgot one more kid. For a second, nobody moved. The tiny crying behind the locked supply closet sounded too small for the size of the fear suddenly filling the hallway. Titan stood perfectly still beside the door, body tense, ears forward, breathing sharp through his nose. He had found the sound before anyone else. Again, Deputy Ryan Cooper stepped closer, face pale now beneath fluorescent kitchen lights that flickered weakly overhead. No, he whispered softly, almost to himself. Everybody was supposed to be outside. Mason Reed crouched near the door, one hand already testing the handle carefully. Locked. He listened closely. Another tiny cry drifted through the wood. Frightened. Young. Alone. Somewhere deeper inside the building came another faint metallic sound followed by the soft hiss of old heating pipes struggling harder than they should have. Mason looked once toward Ryan. Calm. Focused. How old is the building? Ryan swallowed hard. Almost 60 years. Mason nodded once. Old pipes. Old gas lines. Old systems that failed quietly before people noticed. None of that mattered now. What mattered sat behind the locked door. Mason lowered his voice. Hey buddy, he called gently. Can you hear me? Silence. Then finally a small trembling voice answered. Mom. Mason glanced briefly toward Ryan. Not your mom, he said calmly. But we are here to help. More silence. Then quiet crying again. Titan slowly lowered himself near the door and rested against it gently. Waiting. Patient. Mason noticed immediately. Dogs understood fear in ways people forgot. You hear my dog? Mason asked softly. Tiny sniffle. Yeah. His name is Titan. Mason smiled faintly despite the tension. He found you. Silence again. Then quietly. Is he nice? Titan let out the softest sound in his throat. Not bark. Not growl. Just warmth somehow shaped into sound. Mason nodded, even though the boy could not see him. Nicest guy in Montana. Ryan moved beside Mason now, guilt growing heavier with every passing second. How do we get this open? He asked quietly. Mason examined the lock carefully. Old supply room handle. Cheap mechanism. Probably stuck. He tested the frame lightly. Old wood. Weak hinges. Outside, wind rattled the building harder now. Somewhere near the front of the diner a light popped softly and dimmed again. Time felt smaller suddenly. Mason stood slowly. Step back, he said calmly. Ryan hesitated. What are you doing? Mason glanced once toward the door. Opening it. No anger. No urgency in his voice. Just certainty. Titan stepped aside immediately like he understood the assignment before humans caught up again. Mason positioned himself carefully near the frame and pressed against weakened wood near the lock. Controlled pressure. Measured. No panic. Old buildings rarely needed force. Usually they just needed confidence. One quiet crack. Then another. The door shifted slightly. Behind it came startled crying. Easy. Mason said quickly, voice soft again. You are okay. One more careful push. The old latch finally gave way with a sharp pop. Inside sat a little girl no older than 6 wrapped tightly in an oversized diner sweater, knees pulled against her chest near stacked cleaning supplies. Tears streaked her cheeks. Small hands shook from fear. The moment Titan stepped quietly into the room, something changed. Fear softened. Just enough. The girl stared wide-eyed at the German shepherd. Doggy, she whispered. Titan slowly lowered himself near her, calm and still. No sudden movement. No pressure. Just presence. Safe presence. Mason crouched carefully near the doorway. Hey there, he said gently. You okay? The girl shook her head quickly. I got scared. Ryan exhaled shakily beside him. Sweetheart, he said quietly, recognizing her suddenly. Emma? She looked up immediately. Officer Ryan. Relief hit him hard enough to hurt. Your mom has been crying outside looking for you. Emma wiped tears quickly. I was hiding. Mason tilted his head slightly. From what? She looked toward the kitchen. The loud noise. Mason exchanged one quick look with Ryan. The earlier metallic sounds. The unstable system. She probably panicked and hid after getting separated in evacuation. Titan gently rested near Emma's feet, warm and patient, while she cautiously reached out to touch thick fur. He is warm, she whispered. Mason smiled faintly. Yeah. Then softly. He has a habit of finding people. Somewhere overhead, another strange hiss echoed faintly through the ceiling. Longer this time. Wrong enough to make Mason stand immediately. Calm disappeared back into focus. Ryan, he said quietly, we need outside now. Ryan nodded quickly. Mason carefully removed his gloves and handed them to Emma before wrapping his old scarf gently around her shoulders. You ride with us, he said softly. Titan moved first again, walking slowly beside the little girl like he had accepted another mission without asking questions. Back through the hallway they moved quickly, weak lights flickering above them while snow pressed hard against windows. Near the kitchen entrance, Mason paused briefly. His eyes shifted toward the dining room. Something caught his attention immediately. The old jukebox near the front corner had stopped playing. Completely silent now. But one thing had changed. Near the register, beside Evelyn's station, an old framed military photograph had fallen crooked against the wall. Mason froze for half a second staring at it. Then Ryan noticed his expression. What? Mason did not answer right away. His eyes narrowed slightly, quiet recognition passing across his face. Finally, almost to himself, he whispered softly. That cannot be possible. Mason Reed stood frozen for only half a second before instinct moved him again. Emma's small hand stayed wrapped tightly around Titan's fur, while Deputy Ryan Cooper guided them quickly toward the front entrance of Rosie's diner. Snow swirled hard outside the windows, but inside something else lingered now. Recognition. Quiet and unexpected. Mason glanced once more toward the crooked military photograph near the register before continuing outside. The moment Emma stepped into the parking lot, a woman wrapped in a winter coat broke into tears and rushed forward through the snow. Emma, she cried, dropping to her knees and pulling the little girl into her arms so tightly it looked like fear itself had finally let go. Emma buried her face into her mother's shoulder while still clutching Mason's scarf. The dog found me, she whispered softly. Her mother looked up immediately, eyes full of gratitude she could not quite explain. Thank you, she whispered shakily toward Mason. He only nodded once. Quiet people rarely knew what to do with praise. Titan stood beside him calmly while snow collected along thick fur, tail moving once when Emma reached out to pet him again. Behind them, Ryan finally radioed the situation through with urgency strong enough to push weather delays aside. Within 20 minutes, utility crews arrived through thick snow and flashing yellow lights. After a careful inspection, workers confirmed what Mason already suspected. A damaged gas valve near the kitchen heating line had been leaking pressure for hours. Old pipes. Faulty repair work. Dangerous timing. One older technician shook his head slowly while standing near the truck. Another hour, he said quietly, and this could have turned into something real bad. Ryan looked immediately toward Mason, standing near the diner entrance. Cold jacket. Quiet face. Same man he had handcuffed barely 2 hours earlier. Funny thing about judgment. Sometimes it embarrassed people long before apologies arrived. Evelyn stepped carefully through the snow carrying a small tin coffee thermos. You look frozen, she said softly, handing it toward Mason. How's coffee? On the house. Mason accepted it quietly. Thank you. She hesitated before speaking again. About earlier. Mason shook his head once. Everybody was scared. Evelyn smiled sadly. Still. Then after a second, Rosie's owes you. Mason looked toward Titan instead of answering. The German shepherd had wandered near the diner wall where the old military photograph had been brought outside after falling crooked from the wall. Titan sat beside it strangely still, watching, waiting. Mason walked closer. Snow dusted the edge of the old frame now. Faded photograph. Military uniforms. Younger faces. One man standing near the center smiling beside a sheriff deputy wearing reserve patches. Mason's expression shifted slightly. Quiet memory returning slowly. Ryan stepped closer. You know somebody in it? Mason pointed carefully toward one man in uniform. Him. Ryan frowned. That is my dad. Silence settled between them. Wind moved quietly through the parking lot now, softer than before somehow. Ryan looked from the picture to Mason again. You knew him? Mason hesitated. Long enough to search old memories buried beneath years. Afghanistan, he said quietly. Convoy support. Ryan blinked hard. Wait. His face changed suddenly. Recognition finding him all at once. My dad used to talk about somebody, he said softly. A quiet Navy guy who helped get his unit out during a bad situation. Mason looked away toward the snow. Long time ago. Ryan stood speechless for a second. He said that man disappeared before anyone got to thank him. Evelyn suddenly gasped softly beside them. Good Lord, she whispered. That is you. Mason shrugged lightly. Was not looking for credit. Ryan laughed once under his breath, almost emotional now. You save people and then disappear? Mason took a slow sip of coffee. Sometimes quiet feels easier. Ryan looked toward Titan. Guess your dog disagrees. Titan glanced up briefly like he understood more than he let on. A few minutes later, Ryan disappeared briefly into his truck and returned holding a worn envelope protected carefully inside an old plastic folder. My dad left this with me years ago, he said quietly. Said if I ever met the man who helped his unit. Ryan paused. I was supposed to give it to him. Mason hesitated before accepting it. Inside sat a handwritten letter and a folded property deed. Small cabin near a mountain lake 30 miles outside town. Left years earlier by Ryan's father with one sentence written carefully across the page. For the man who reminded me that quiet courage still exists. Mason stood there for a long moment while snow drifted softly around the parking lot. Titan stepped beside him and rested against his leg quietly. Warm, steady, present. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Needs repairs, he admitted. But it is yours if you want it. Mason looked toward the frozen road stretching into darkness. Then toward Rosie's diner glowing softly against snow. Strange night. Strange town. Strange kindness. Finally, for the first time all evening, something small crossed his tired face. Not quite surprise. Not quite disbelief. Just peace arriving carefully. Titan wagged his tail once as if approving the decision before Mason even spoke. Weeks later, people in town stopped calling him the suspicious stranger from the diner. They simply said the same thing whenever the quiet white pickup rolled past Main Street beside a familiar German shepherd. That is Mason, they would say softly. The veteran with the dog who stayed when everybody else was scared. And maybe that was the strange thing about kindness. Sometimes it came back long after people forgot they ever gave it away.